I'm Jacqueline Suskin, and I'm going to talk to you about my job as a poet. Do you know anybody who's a professional poet? Anybody?
Nope.
Singer. Yeah. Professional poet.
He's a poet, didn't know it.
But poetry has been my only job since 2009. I didn't actually imagine my career as a poet. I just followed my talents, and my choices were just based upon things that inspire me. And I ended up meeting someone in Oakland, California, who told me that he had been typing poems in public at street fairs and farmers markets with his typewriter for people, and it had been his only job for about 4 years. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? And he was like, yeah, you should try it with me. And I had just purchased a typewriter like a week before, and I was like, all right, I will. And I kind of just did it as an experiment. I was like, oh, this is an interesting writing exercise, to be in public and have to write a poem on demand. And someone comes up to me and says, I would like a poem about whatever subject they choose. And then I have to write it really quickly because I'm in public and there's people all around. It's usually like a street fair, farmer's market, where there's just people bustling and talking, and they're in a hurry and they have cash in their hand and they want it to be really fast. It's like instant gratification. So I didn't even know if I could do that the first time I did it. I was just, we'll see what happens. And after the first poem, I was like, oh, this is something incredibly special. Wow. Like, the first woman who got a poem asked for a poem about heartbreak. And she was like, oh, not the typical kind of heartbreak, but like you look back on your whole life and there's so many things that you couldn't do because you can't do everything. There's so many places that I couldn't live because you can't live everywhere. There's so many people you can't love because you can't love everyone, and it's just heartbreaking. I was like, whoa, I have stepped into this deep realm in the middle of hundreds of people in the street of Oakland. And I wrote the poem, read it to the woman, and she just started bawling. I was like, okay, this is something really important. And I kind of dedicated myself to it, just in the sense of I was like, oh, I'll try this a little longer, I'll do it a couple more times. And then after a few years of that, I was like, this could be my career. I mean, I was kind of combining my two strongest talents, which one is writing, but the other one is connecting with people. And to figure out a combination of that and to make money while putting those things together into use isn't something that I really ever thought of. It just kind of came to me. And it seemed so obvious that I had to follow that career. So I have written poems about all different kinds of things, but this is one that I wrote, I guess, pretty recently. And really, Poem Store is so many things. I mean, it's a business and it's a writing exercise, but it's also this really special exchange that I have with people. I mean, what else is like that, where I have a one-on-one experience with a stranger. They tell me something really personal. Almost every time I do it, someone cries. It's like, it's something really special. So someone asked me to write this poem, and I was like, oh, this is about what I'm doing. It's the art of giving. It's a gift. And so a lot of times people will pay for a gift. And I really like doing the donation system because that allows people to get a poem about whatever they want. And so they can get a poem about an incredibly sad thing and maybe only have $1 in their pocket and walk away feeling better, or at least heard and seen. Then they don't have to break the bank for it. They can just pay whatever they want. So I really like that part of it. People are always like, oh, why don't you put a price on the poems? And it's kind of nice. Just for me, really, it's very simple. The reason why I don't do that is because it allows the freedom of a large demographic to be able to get a poem. It doesn't put restriction on that, which I think is important. So I just put a bunch of pictures of myself in here because what else am I going to do? It's like, this is all there is, really, just me and a typewriter. Not very much to go off of except for that. But I've gotten topics like you wouldn't believe, like the craziest concepts, and people asking for poems about, trying to stump me. And I've never been stumped. I mean, people have said words to me that I've never heard of, and then I just say, well, what does that mean? And they tell me, and then I write a poem about it. But people always ask, do you ever get writer's block? How do you do it? I don't know, I've never never gotten writer's block, and I don't know how I do it. I read a lot. That's usually my answer. I read a lot. But I think that part of my story is important to talk about, which is that I did poem store at the Arcata Farmers Market, which is in Humboldt County, which is at the very top of the state. And I lived in a little cabin in the middle of the woods, and I lived off the grid, and I didn't have electricity, and had spring water, and grew my own food. And I would drive my little pickup truck into town on the weekends, and pick up my bike from my friend's house, and ride to the farmer's market and type poems. And that was my life. And I was like, the town poet! And I'd walk around this little town, and everyone knew who I was, and they'd be like, oh, hey, poet! And it was really dreamy. It was like, I mean, how dreamy is that, to be the town poet? Come on, it was incredible. I left there because I was like, you know, I think that I should be doing this for more people. Like, I kind of got it into my mind that I could make a career out of it, but then I also was like, I feel like I have a responsibility that I'd be shirking off to just stay in this tiny town for my whole life and not try to give this gift to as many people as possible. So I moved to LA, and that is where I ended up finishing my new book. So at the end, I talk about my book a little bit, and at the end I'll write some poems. So if you want to think of, you know, a couple subjects, I don't think I'll be able to write them for all of you, but maybe like 5 people or something. And I can write you some poems, and I'll tell you about my book, but then if you have questions about Poem Store, you can ask at the end, but I'll talk about my book for just a minute so you can know what it's about, because it does tie in. So I'll go ahead and like it, and my friend, I always like to bring up my friend Otto, because he is a very key character in my life, and I think that when you're thinking of an entrepreneurial spirit, you're thinking of inspiration. And he gave me my first found photograph, which inspired my first book, which is I have here. And it's a combination of found photographs and narrative poems. And he also gave me this list of likes. He's my friend in college, and he gave me a list of things that he liked as a note when we were first getting to know each other. And that inspired my second book, Go Ahead and Like It. And it also, this one person inspired both of the books that I've written. I always like to talk about that, because don't ever underestimate the power of one of your friends saying some great idea, and then like 10 years later you're like, I'm gonna write a book about that idea. And then it's happened twice now to me. So he gave me that list, and I was like, oh, that's a nice exercise. And I started writing lists of things that I like. I kind of did it as a writing exercise. I would do it before I would write my journal, or I would do it if I was in a bad mood. And I have so many of these lists. And suddenly, after like all these years of writing lists and looking at all of them, I was like, you know what? This is obviously a practice that is really beneficial to me. Like, I go to it all the time to help me if I'm in a bad mood, or to help me break out of some train of thought. And so I thought I would write a book about it, because I was like, well, it helps me. I'm just a human being. I bet it could help other human beings. And so I put together this book, and I guess my favorite example is the traffic jam. This is kind of a good way for me to describe what the book is about. So you're sitting in traffic. There's nothing really to like about this situation. It's kind of like the worst situation to be in, and boring and not inspiring. But every time I'm in a traffic jam, in my mind, I make a list of things that I like. So I'll look around me, and I'll be like, oh, I like the color of that car next to me. I like the song on the radio. I like the way my socks feel inside my shoes. I like those vines growing on the bridge embankment. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm in a good mood. Who cares if I'm stuck in traffic? Look at all these things to appreciate that are surrounding me. With my art, I'm just trying to make something that's accessible, that can touch everyone and inspire as many people as possible. And the book is like that. Anyone can make a list of things that they like. It applies to anybody, and anyone can relate to the concept of being stuck or bored or not connected to the things that put meaning into their life, but everyone has something that adds meaning to their life, or they would be completely miserable. And even if you are, that can kind of get you out of it. And Poem Store is the same way. Sometimes just having a poem written for you makes everything different. You know, I'll write a poem for someone, and they'll write me an email and be like, hey, that poem that you wrote me totally changed my life. I have it framed next to my bed. I read it every day. Or, oh, I carry that poem that you wrote me in my wallet, and I constantly reference it. It like always lifts me up. It always makes me feel better. It's like, one poem can have that much power in a person's life. It's crazy, you know, and they paid me $2 for it. It's like, to me, that the worth of it all is that it like really makes a difference for someone. And what a crazy thing to be able to like be a writer and directly see your impact. It doesn't always happen like that, you know, like I do kind of dream of being a hermit and, you know, being a regular writer, just like I'm gonna go back to my cabin, but when I have experiences like that, it makes it worth it. So oftentimes this is what I feel like I'm doing for people. I'm helping something inside of them come to the surface, which feels like pretty special work. In the list is the same exact thing, you know, helping people bring something that is inside of themselves out to the surface for them to see and interact with. So that's the whole of my kind of goal. If you want to get some poems, I'll write them for you now. But you have to raise your hand and I'll just like blindly.
So when do you purchase your book?
Well, I guess I don't need this microphone. Hi. This book comes out on April 28th with a giant publisher that's kind of blowing my mind right now. But and then these are my first books. So I brought a bunch of them if you want them. But I think it's important to do Poem Store for a minute just so you can see what it's like, not just listen to me talk about it. Does anybody want to do a poem?
The 14-year-old girl.
All right. Would you like to hear it?
Yeah.
Of course.
Sometimes people say no. Because I think that it's private and they don't want everyone to hear it.
Use the mic.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's hard for me to do that. You're going to have to pull it in and out of there. It's not fun. Thanks. All right. The 14-year-old girl, set forth within the spell of youth, she makes the whole of life seem like some growing vine, some aim upward, and the struggle is sure, but the bloom is a promise on the horizon, and she is dedicated to the petals unfolding as they will.
A 6-month-old baby who likes to dance.
Six-month-old baby who likes to dance already feels the wild rhythm of being set forth in body, the best version of self in motion, knowing that dance is a sense we are born with, and so why wait to unleash the moves that will turn into more and more.
Oh, okay, all right.
Let me photograph it though.
What?
We'll photograph it.
Well, how about I break it up and you can ask me a couple questions and then I'll do a couple more poems. But does anyone want to ask me something?
Can you walk us through the process? Somebody yells something at you and...
The process is a mystery to me. I don't actually know. I worked with this brain research person once. He did a lot of like tests. There was just verbal kind of following the lead of what was happening, and he made me walk through it and really like, there's like a whole gap in the process that is, I don't understand what's going on, you know, like obviously I have a large vocabulary, but it you know, not really, like it's not like some expensive crazy thing. I'm not using words that people don't understand because like I said, I want to make something that's accessible. So it's sort of just a blankness that comes over me, a trance or something, whatever you want to call it. But you know, I hear a word in my head that's the beginning of the poem and then that's it. By the end of it, I mean, while I'm writing it, I actually am so out of it that I can look up into the beginning of the poem to see if I've made mistakes while I'm still writing it. I don't know, it's a very strange thing that's happening, so, yeah.
So there are no any pictures? You don't see any pictures in the process?
Sometimes I'll see an image, yeah. If there's an image in the poem, then that's usually something I saw. But it doesn't always, you know, my poetry that I work on outside of Poem Store, which I call my real poetry, it's full of visions and images, and it's much more, you know, specific. And this is is specific to that person. So whatever, it's specific because you asked about a specific subject, and that's the only specificity that's really needed within that tiny little thing. I use the same size piece of paper every time because it's muscle memory. I don't have to think about how long the poem's going to be. I don't have to think about where the lines are going to break as much or anything like that, which in a real poem, I'm constantly editing and reworking the shape of it, choosing where the lines end to change the rhythm. But this is sort of like a set form that I've created for myself to make it easier.
Have you always been able to kind of block out what are they going to think of it, or was it something you had to kind of process through?
The idea of thinking about what they're going to think about it doesn't really matter to me because it almost always, if someone's getting a poem from me, I'm like, oh, you are the kind of person who will get a poem from me. So you're not even when people are skeptical, that's kind of my favorite. That's my favorite customer. When someone's like, what are you doing? What is going on here? And they're like, really, like, you can tell they think it's going to be crappy. And then I write this great poem and they're like, oh my gosh, what? I like that. I love that. I love just changing someone's idea about what, this kind of experience can be, so.
So obviously we're watching you at the peak of your art form, but you woodshedded one hell of a long time, obviously, but at some point you moved into this as something you were going to hone, it seems like, or it's come easy, but so your time up in, what'd you say, Arcadia?
Arcata, yeah.
Arcata. I spent some time in Mendocino, and there's that, looking at what you're doing there, and that isolation that you chose, and then your path to there. Are you coming from that area, or did you go to that area, end up honing your craft?
Truthfully, my experience with Poem Store up there is the same as it is here. It's not different. There's just more people here, so I can do it more here. And it really came pretty easily to me right away, which was what was so interesting about this. I never felt like, oh, I gotta get better at it. It was just like, oh, this is a thing that I can do really well. Like, immediately, like with the first poem, I was like, oh, wow, I can write a poem that fast and it comes out and I like it. And so after that, I just kind of did it whenever. And, the craft that I work on is actually the real poems. That's what takes like a lot more for me. This came really naturally. And also, like, I wrote this whole thing a while ago that kind of talked about that I'm not making a masterpiece. Like, I'm just making whatever I can give to that person in the moment. Like, the best thing that I can offer in that moment is all I'm hoping for. So that kind of plays into what you were asking too, is I'm not hoping to create a masterpiece. I hope I make something that this person can understand and that, they think is worth their while. And usually, I've actually never had an experience where someone was like, oh, this isn't good. But I don't think it's the arena for that, It's
But
like,
do you feel different degrees of happiness or satisfaction?
yeah, I think sometimes, like, some people are more open than other people in general. So when they have an experience, their reaction is going to be much more enthusiastic, or like, they're going to be much more expressive.
I mean,
about
for
how they
yourself.
feel.
For yourself.
Oh yeah,
Are you happy with
I like a lot of
something?
poems more than others. There'll be some that I'm like, ooh, that was a really good one. And I never see them again. So that's another really strange thing, is that I never see these poems again. People are always like, why don't you make a carbon copy of it? Then you could make a whole book. And I'm just like, well, there's a part of it that I like about it not being for me or about me. Like, I'm not writing this poem for you so that I can also keep it and make more money off of it later. Like, I'm writing the poem for you so you can have it. And this is like an intrinsic special quality to that I feel like you don't really get very often. I teach high school a lot, and I always tell them, like, because how often do you get to, like, do the thing that you love to do and make a living off of it? It doesn't happen very often. It's pretty rare. And I always am like, is this going to work today? Like, I go to work and I'm like, are people really going to buy poems from me today? Is this really my job?
So your income also comes from teaching?
Yeah, but it's like something like this, where I give a talk and write poems for people. I'm only talking about doing my job, so.
What?
Yeah.
You said that you read a lot, so what kind of books do you like most?
Well, I read a lot of poetry. Wendell Berry is my favorite poet. If you haven't read him, you should look him up. It's really good. He's still alive. Okay, how about I write another poem? Someone, yeah.
The 4 college roommates.
Want to hear it? Yeah. 4 college roommates. Together through the thick of knowledge, coming close with connection that lasts, that leads into future, which will look like wisdom, and all better for this time spent in sync, under one roof, taking in every ounce of language and all of history, the total spell of union, theirs to fully celebrate.
What's the teenagers like?
Books for teenagers. Spoken from the page of imagination, the grand outlets unfold, and with every word taken in, with every ounce of feeling exposed through story, the youth in their gaze eats up mystery and all possibility held within the spines, lined upon their shelves like treasure meant for their eyes only. I'll do questions again. Anyone want to ask any other questions?
Pulling that length that you decided on, how long did it take to kind of come to that particular form?
You know, someone gave me this paper. So, my neighbor randomly gave me, it's like old stenographer paper. And I just ripped it in half, not even thinking about it. You know, I just thought, oh, that's a good size. So whenever that happened, that was probably like in 2010, maybe 2011. My neighbor was clearing out her attic, and she was like, do you want all this paper? And it lasted me for years. And then by the time that I used it all up, though, I was like, oh, this is my paper. I gotta order more of it. And I looked on the internet for stenographer paper. Ordered a lot of it.
I have a question.
Okay.
Your brain is obviously wonderfully energized as you do this. I wonder, have you experienced a certain brain fatigue coming in at some point after doing X amounts of...
This is the most psychically exhausting thing I've ever done in my life. Afterwards, I'm like a wreck. You know, like I have to go to bed. And I eat a lot and then I go to bed. It's really hard on my brain and my body. It's like really very exhausting. And, you know, I've gotten better over the years at like knowing how long I can do it, knowing, you know, to sit on a pillow and like, you know, just different things that make it a little bit easier for me. But yeah, it's very tiring. Very tiring.
I was at another meeting on campus, so I missed your intro. So if you answered it, but that's, you know, I'll catch up later. But did you just kind of do it and then realize you had a business, or did you do a business plan with a business model?
No. Oh no, I'm way too much of a wingnut for that. I just kind of was really just trying it out, and then eventually I was like, huh, I've been paying my rent with this for like almost a year, and I was like, I bet I can do a really good career move and go to LA, and you know, that took me another year to actually make that decision. It was really hard to leave where I was living because I loved being there, but I was like, I bet if I move to LA, I can do it like I'm doing it at the farmer's market once a week, but then also like do presentations and talks at schools and things like that, which is really important to me. And then also I work tons of parties here, like lots of just really weird, interesting Hollywood parties. And like, you know, people are like, oh, I want a special thing at my party. And I'll have you come in. And then the tarot card reader next to you. It's cool. I actually really like that because it's a kind of good combination. I'm like, this is brilliant. These people are paying for their guests to figure themselves out at their party. It's pretty interesting. And like a lot of weddings and you know things like that, which is really sweet. So,
Did you ever evolve a business model?
nope. I was just like, well, I'll do it as much as possible, I guess. But I can really only do it a couple of times a week because it's so tiring. So people are like, how often do you work? And I really only work like, at the most, I think I've worked 4 times in a week before, but that is a lot. Like, you know, it usually takes me like the next day, I'll be just like, oh my gosh, you know. I'm doing a residency right now at a gallery in Melrose, and tomorrow is the last day. And so I have this tonight, and then I have to get up and go to jury duty, and then I have to go to the gallery and write poems for people until 6 o'clock. And it's like, it's tiring. It is a lot of work. But.
Do you teach kids to do that? To write poems? Do you speak about poetry in general?
Yeah, usually I just give kind of an overview, like, about poetry in a way that they probably aren't usually exposed to. Like, I try to show them poems that I'm sure their teacher hasn't showed them, and, like, show them concepts that poetry is much bigger than this, like, boring, stodgy thing that they've been, you know, kind of just made to experience in school. And it's funny because going to schools is a little terrifying for me, because I'll say, oh, how many of you keep a journal? And like one kid will raise their hand, and it's like, oh no, no one keeps a journal anymore. And then, how many of you write poetry in your notebooks? And like 2 kids will kind of, you know, it's like, it's kind of something that they're not engaged with, but then by the end of the class, they're like, oh my gosh, but you could be a poet for your job. And they're kind of like, oh, maybe I could do that. And they're, you know, it just like turns them on to thinking, and I think that that applies to anyone of any age. You can just suddenly be like, oh, this can be my job for this many years. That kind of always makes me feel like, yeah, anyone can do anything.
Poetry, wear you out as much as this type of poetry?
Oh no, I mean, it's a completely different process. So it's like with this, one of the reasons why it's so tiring is because I'm engaging with so many people one-on-one. So it's like they're sucking my energy out of me, and like, you know, we're exchanging energy, and there's like a lot more going on there than just me being a little weirdo in my house, like working like one line over and over again, like meditating on that. That's like actually probably gives me energy to write my own work. You know?
Have people tried to copy you?
Yeah, there are other people who do it, and I mean, they can't copy me because they can't write like I write. They write in a different way than me, so usually I'm just like, go for it, try it out, you know, but don't step on my toes or come to my farmer's market or but I don't mind that, you know, I know a lot of people who started doing it, like I met someone and now they do it in New York, and he's my friend, and I just talked to him about the experiences and stuff, but his poetry is completely different than mine. You know, he has a completely different style, and doesn't really, I think it's kind of neat to see that.
So has pricing, I mean, at the end of the month, you look back, or at the end of where you are, you look back, there must be some trends in terms of how you're going to make money in place. So you said you do events. Will you go for a fixed price for the event? Okay.
For the events, I don't take, you know, like, it's not donation for the events. Because, I mean, they don't want their guests to have a bunch of cash on them the whole time at their party, you know, so they'll pay me a flat rate, which I actually love, because then money is not a part of the one-on-one exchange, which is much more pleasant for me. You know, like, I would rather money not be a part of any exchange, but it is, and I'm a realistic person. Thus, I've made this my job instead of like, you know.
So the ones that are fluid are farmers markets. Where else what are the other environments where you put yourself in there?
That is where I go to the Hollywood Farmers Market every Sunday. That's like my fixed weekly work. And then everything else is kind of up in the air.
And how early do you start on those days? How many, you got a couple hours you can do there? Or
I cannot do this for longer than 4 hours, so I'll be at the market for 4 hours and then I'll go home. That's pretty much how long the market is anyway, so, yeah.
I noticed native speaking wouldn't like it typing.
Oh yeah, I already had this discussion earlier. Everyone always comments on the fact that I type with 2 fingers, but I taught myself to type like that for this project because I was typing with all of my fingers as if I were using a computer, and some of the letters were lighter and it was hard to read, and I wasn't able to do it as fast. And so I was like, oh, I gotta figure out a better way to do this. And my friend who gave me the idea to do Poem Store also types like that. And then all the other people I know who do Poem Store also type like that. Because for some reason, you're able to be much more precise, like when you're doing this thing so quickly that there's not really room for you to like make an error by slightly pressing one of the keys. So it's definitely a technique that people are always like, oh, you don't know how to type. And I'm like, I do! I had to make a new way. It comes up a lot.
Is it part of the process? That's what I was going to ask.
Totally.
Because the rhythm, there's kind of a rhythm to that.
Yeah, and like I can be much more like, okay, right now I know I'm pressing a W. Like, I'm not seeing any of my other fingers. It's not very much time for me to like, parcel out what I'm doing, so. Yeah, any other questions? How are, I don't know what the time limit is, or what's going on with the time. I'm not good at that. Does anyone know?
We're done.
Oh, we're done?
We're gonna done.
Okay.
So I will.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.